A Lantern, Chapter 25. John's letters came again in the late spring. In them an echo of the breeze that blows over the Kotzebue Sound. For Christmas dinner we had fish balls and egg sauce, baked white fish, ptarmigan, pot roast, mashed potatoes, baked dressing, ice cream from condensed milk, and coffee. After the white people ate, the Eskimos took turn and made a thorough cleanup. When one of them found something that struck his palate, he proceeded to devour the entire contents of the dish. 80 white people ate and 25 Eskimos. The miners came dressed in their parkas and mukluks. Thermometer has been down to 38 degrees all day, 46 below in the night. This morning about 11, the ice began moving on the Kiwalik and kept coming all day. There is an ice jam at the Buffs below town, and a number of cabins are in danger of being carried away. Strike on Koogru has been confirmed. The whole river and benches have been staked. Abby, with the letters in her lap, would look out over the familiar fields, green in their spring wheat and their parallel rows of young corn, and wonder how a child of the prairie could have gone so far away. And now nature began to seem less parsimonious in her rains. No longer was the sky a dry blue bowl turned over the dry brown earth. Heavy with moisture, the clouds gathered and fell in a blessing of light showers or heavy soaking rains. Out of nature's benediction grew fine crops, better times, high land prices. A union of farmers to market their own crops was being formed in many localities. Abby took 2 shares of stock in the Cedartown elevator. It's the beginning of something pretty big, I believe, she told Mac. In the fall, Henry Lutz died, and over in the house with the cupola and the wooden rosettes and the fancy grill work, Sarah Lutz clung to Abby constantly, so there was one more duty at hand for her. After her father's death, Emma came into the possession of a large amount of land. Selling here and buying there with good business judgment, and aided by the upward swing of prices, Mac, who is now assistant cashier of the bank, placed the Mackenzie Deal family on the best of financial footing. One more year went by with John proving his ownership of the title Judge Deal in the land of the dog team, and then he came back. In that characteristic way of suddenly doing something with no preliminary talk, he opened a law office in Cedartown. To Abby, it seemed unbelievable and far too good to be true that the wanderer of the family should settle down closer to her than any of the others. Margaret was painting many canvases every year now. Pencil and drawing book with her, she often came home to wander for hours in the vicinity, sketching the cottonwoods or the maples or a rolling bit of pasture land. "When the day comes, Mother," she would say, "that I can get the light that lies over the prairie at evening to suit me, I believe I'll be satisfied." Isabel in Chicago for 3 years was forging ahead in her career, singing at some of the select musical affairs. Abby's natural garment of modesty showed large perforations in it when it came to anything concerning her children's accomplishments. More than once, she hitched up the old white mare and drove into the headlight office to proffer some item about one of her offspring's achievements. "The Deals all seem to do things," Abby heard a visitor to the community say to Oscar Lutz once. The 2 men were sitting on a bench under her kitchen window before one of the many neighborhood suppers. Abby, paring potatoes, could hear every word of Oscar's reply. "The children do. Will himself was a good man, but not much of a manager. Was always planning some wild scheme for the whole community. You can't get anywhere if you spread your plans all out over the whole country. All the school meetings he talked about the day when the country school would be graded like town. Talked of the day when the roads would be fixed. Had some fool plan about hauling little stones from the quarry at Louisville, loads of little stones and gravel, and running a roller over them. Heard him say once, right after a long drought, that Nebraska was the best state in the Union, had the best soil, that the day would come that the climate conditions would change, and it would be the most productive of them all. Talked about trees, trees, trees. Was as loony as old J. Sterling Morton himself about setting out timber. Would go after saplings and cuttings and help haul 'em in for the careless ones if they'd set them out. No, he wasn't lazy, Lord no. Just planning for the whole kit and bilin' of them instead of himself. carried the whole precinct on his shoulders. Didn't leave Abby anything very much besides this one half section, but the 5 children and the good name of Deal. Abby, bending over the potatoes with the neighbor women bustling around her, said softly to one they could not see, "Well, I'm glad you left me the children in the good name of Deal." John was not much more than settled in his new Cedartown office when his 30th birthday arrived, via the 1902 calendar. 30 having been the meridian between youth and old bachelorhood in Abby's day, she concluded quite definitely that he was never going to marry. And as has happened since the time of Naomi's sons appeared before her with Ruth and Orpha, Abby was suddenly astounded by John writing her, while on a business trip, that he was bringing home a bride. She was Eloise Wentworth, a teacher he had met in Iowa, and they would arrive on the 4 o'clock Saturday. Abby sat with the letter in her lap, the world tumbling grotesquely around her. This bolt from the blue, so characteristic of John, was hard to realize. A peculiar form of jealousy tore at her. "I'll bet she did the courting herself," Abby said grimly, and was too wrought up to laugh at herself. Why hadn't he picked out someone she knew? Emma Lutz, Dr. Fred Baker, Harrison Rhodes. She had met and known them all before they came into the family. Why had he done this anyway? Did he know the girl well? What was she like? Of all the children, John was the one who had had to be handled with gloves. Would she know how to get along with him? Why hadn't he married one of the home girls? Why hadn't he ever mentioned the girl? All at once, Abby began to laugh aloud, almost hysterically. "I'm talking for all the world like Grandma," she said. "Oh, I mustn't let myself get like Grandma Deal." She never dreaded anything so much in her life as the prospects of that meeting on Saturday. It took all of her willpower to get herself in hand to welcome them. She was glad that Grace was home with her. Grace was 14 now and in the Cedartown High School. No longer did children of the community have to go from home and board at the old Weeping Water Academy, for the Cedartown High School was now accredited to the university. Grace was a nice girl and a good student, efficient, neat, a little prim. Looking at her sometimes critically, Abby wondered why a keen sense of humor had been omitted from Grace's makeup. She laughed at a joke when it was in the column duly labeled as one, and warranted to tickle the risibilities. But humor, that vague elusive thing which had pulled Abby through many a monotonous day and over many a harsh experience, seemed a missing ingredient. The two, Abby and Grace, met the newly married couple with the Surrey. Abby was 55 now, her once glorious reddish-brown hair colorless where it was not gray, her shoulders drooping, her body rather shapeless. Eloise was pleasant, a nice-looking young woman with firm lips. She had on an Alice blue skirt made the new way with all the gathers in the back, and dragging a little on the station platform. A tight silk waist of the same shade with a cream-colored lace fichu, and a blue hat fitting firmly to her coils of light hair in the back, but protruding fashionably to the front over the large roll of a high pompadour, completed her most up-to-date costume. She met Abby halfway with cordiality. She fitted herself into the family firmly, as though she arrived with the preconceived idea that she was going to make the most of John's mother. Grace took a liking to her immediately. The two discussed school affairs earnestly, with Grace hanging on the new sister's every firm word. Abby, cleaning up the table, listening to them, said to herself, "For all the world, I believe she and Grace are two of a kind." "Mother," Eloise said firmly, after supper when John had gone over to the office, "I'm going to call you Mother right on the start, and then it won't be hard." "I hope," Abby said gently, "it won't be hard to call me Mother." "Oh, no," Eloise said firmly. "I'm not going to let it be hard. That's why I'm beginning at once. Mother, John's and my marriage is to be different from other marriages." "How, Eloise?" "Because I'm going at it in a business-like, systematic way." "Yes," said Abby, "that's a good way. I'm going to make our home a well-organized place of rest and peace for John. That will be nice. You see mistakes on all sides, and I'm not going to make any." "No," said Abby, "of course you won't. I've been reading everything on the subject, and I know that I'm well prepared." "Yes," said Abby meekly. "I think you are." "She has everything, Will," Abby said to the spirit who was comrade and confident. "Education, looks, high ideals, efficiency, everything but a sense of humor. And oh, Will, how John will miss it." "He admires her, Abby." "And loves her, Will. And love covers many things." The next year, Abby sold the rest of the acreage to Gus Reinmuller, retaining the 5 acres which contained the house and outbuildings, the orchard, and 1 pasture. Gus paid $12,000 for it, giving $4,000 in cash and an interest-bearing note. "Now we can plan for Grace to go to the university," Abby said. "Grace wants to be a teacher, and now I can help her." Now that the land was sold, Abby did not have to think of the responsibility of the crops, but her hands were still busy with chickens and pigs and the cow. She drove a sorrel mare now back and forth, attending everything that went on in Cedartown, which she felt would benefit her mentally, and she did not miss a church service or ladies' aid. One of the attractions that summer, which she and Grace patronized, was an entertainment in the Opera House, purporting to be a sort of magic lantern show in which the people in the picture would move about as they were thrown on the sheet. "It may be true," Abby admitted, but added with frank suspicion that there was probably a catch in it somewhere. The program opened with a piece by the Cedartown Orchestra. Probably the Boston Symphony could have done as well, but old Charlie Beadle, who was leader and drummer, would not have admitted it. A male quartet sang, "Out on the Deep When the Sun is Low." One gathered the rather disquieting impression from their forlorn and hopeless tones that there was small prospect of ever seeing the center of the solar system again. Miss Happy Joy Hanson then spoke, "The Raggedy Man, he works for Pa," with so much childish lisping and so much coy twisting of an imaginary apron that one would never in the world could have guessed her age unless he had known, as all Cedartown did, that neither happily nor joyously would she ever again see 32. And then the picture. The male quartet, having apparently recovered from the sad effects of the setting sun, launched forth into a spirited presentation of When Kate and I Were Coming Through the Rye. A field of grain was plainly visible on the cloth, and incredulous as it seemed, it waved and jerked and twitched. Kate came into sight, and unbelievably as it was, Kate also waved and jerked and twitched. A young man close behind her, with every indication of St. Vitus dance, also waved and jerked and twitched. But they moved. The advertisement had not lied. Across the sheet, the people moved. "Dear, dear," Abby said on the way home. "What next can they do? There's just nothing now left to be invented, Grace." Later that fall, Abby helped organize a women's club. "I don't know that we'll do a great deal of good, but we won't do any harm, and much of life is an experiment anyway." Christine was disgusted when Abby told her. "A club? Ach, for what? To hit me?" On the very day of which Abby drove home with the office of second vice president of the Cedartown Women's Club upon her shoulders, a touch of the old raw prairie days presented itself like a bit of the past. She met Oscar Lutz with a wild deer which he had shot and killed in the timber a mile east of Stove Creek. A young buck that, quivering and at bay, seemed the last survivor of his comrades that had once roamed the East Nebraska country. Grace graduated from high school when Abby was 58. She gave the valedictory of her class an earnest, if youthful, dissertation on Heaven is Not Reached by a Single Bound. The Sunday after the exercises, all of the children but Isabel were home for dinner. At the table, Max said, "Mother, you ought to offer the place up for sale right away to get a buyer by fall. It will make some farmer who wants to retire a mighty good place. A nice little 5-acre tract with the orchard and pasture and all." "I would have before this," Abby admitted, "but I haven't been real sure in my mind that I'd leave it all." They all voiced the same sentiment. "Oh, yes, Mother, you ought to move to Lincoln with Grace. There's no real use for you staying. With Grace gone, just think how lonesome you'll be." Dr. Baker and Margaret were willing to have Grace and Mother live with them, just as Isabel had done for those 2 years. The Bakers had been married 15 years now. Dr. Baker's firm was a leading one, Dr. Baker himself prominent in his profession. They had a nice, comfortable home. Lincoln was a city. "Oh, no, I wouldn't want to do that," Abby said. "Not both of us. That would be one too many anyway. If I go, Grace and I will have a little place of our own." That set them off on another tangent. There were nice cottages going up everywhere, several attractive ones of the new type called bungalows. Before they left, they went over all the arguments for selling. "The place is too big for you, Mother. What do you need a yard this size? Or a house with this many rooms? Or a barn?" Their talk was sensible. All the arguments seemed on their side. And above all the reasons is the one that it's going to be lonesome for you here. They were unanimous in that opinion of their mother's coming loneliness. Abby thought about it a great deal that summer before it was time for Grace to go. At times she decided that she was foolish to stay in the old place. The children were right. It was only old-fashioned, narrow people who never made a change. She believed she would go up to Lincoln and look at cottages. In the city there would be larger life for her, new contacts, opportunities to see and hear better things. Just as she had half reconciled herself to the plan, she would walk down the path between the cedars which she and Will had set out. Look at her hollyhocks and delphinium, blood red and sea blue against the white pickets, stand for a time and gaze over toward the heavy fringe of willows and oaks and elms along Stove Creek. Everything looked familiar, friendly. There would never be another real home for her. Home was something besides so much lumber and plaster. You built your thoughts into the framework. You planned a little of your heart with the trees and the shrubbery. It was the only old home the children had ever known. There ought to be a home for children to come to, and their children, a central place to which they could always bring their joys and sorrows, an old familiar place for them to return on Sundays and Christmases. An old home ought to always stand like a mother with open arms. It ought to be here waiting for the children to come to it, like homing pigeons. On the next Sunday, Abby was ready with her decision. "No, I've decided. I'm going to stay here. This is my home." They went over all the arguments again. "The place is too big for you, Mother. What do you need of a house this size? Or a barn? And above all, with Grace gone, it'll be too lonely for you here." Abby looked beyond the poplars, stared for a moment beyond the Lombardy poplars into the deepening prairie twilight. "No," she said quietly, "you wouldn't understand. It won't be lonely here."